one last thing for Jim, my father-in-law, Jim Albers, retired NASA, that I wanted to ask him about. I was just curious. So I want to talk about the Columbia breakup coming in, through the atmosphere there. And, there was foam that had come off of the center section, of the rocket, and it hit the wing and had blown a huge hole in the leading edge of the wing. And obviously they didn't catch that. And I just wonder, if they would have known about that in space, would there have been anything they could have done, to rescue the crew, you think?
Okay, yeah, I can talk about that a little bit. In fact, the development of a thermal protection system for Space Shuttle was developed at Ames Research Center. So the research for the foam and everything, what they would use for insulation to avoid the shuttle from burning up on reentry, was done at Ames. And during that reentry, obviously, they did not know from a camera, they didn't have visual pictures of they saw it breaking off, but they didn't see the fact that it hit another portion of the wing and had a big chunk of the insulation off. And if they would have had pictures of that, they would have not done reentry, you know what I'm saying? They would have aborted or something. They would have had to do something different. But at the time, and I'm sure at that time, the structural engineer that developed the foam, which was at Ames Research Center, was involved in those discussions to say we lost some of the foam. And his issue was the fact they lost it was not a major issue because it wasn't that much. He thought the body of the aircraft could handle that portion, but he didn't know the fact that a piece of this foam broke a major chunk of the insulation off on the wing, which then in that case overheated. The astronauts obviously got a too high temperature, what exactly happened to them, but a very high temperature on entry as a result of the big chunk missing on the wing, which actually caused the accident.
So if they would have, let's say for example, if they would have had visual evidence on launch that the leading edge of the wing had, and I remember seeing something on it, it was a good 2-foot hole in the leading edge of the wing itself, an actual hole in the wing that the foam had blown open.
They had pictures.
Yeah.
And so I think after that accident, I think they would do a complete survey, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Of the entire aircraft. This was on the initial flight where the foam came off. It wasn't on reentry, so they could have boarded, not go to outer space. They could have went out and then came back without, doing a reentry.
Yeah, aborted immediately. Aborted immediately.
Right.
Yeah. Now what about being in space? If they, let's say, for example, had done a spacewalk as an example, and all of a sudden noticed a big 2-foot hole in the leading edge of the wing, what do you do then? Like, obviously, you cannot re-enter the Earth's atmosphere in that condition. So would they be able to make it to the International Space Station? Would they be able to stay in orbit longer? Like, how would you rescue them? What kind of protocols are in place to rescue them? There's got to be something, right?
This is a challenging. Well, you're assuming at the time we had space station.
Well, I mean, I know at the time they were just doing a normal orbit of the Earth, a typical standard mission. So where in relation to this, to the International Space Station, I have no idea.
If you're in space doing a walk in space out of the aircraft, normally you wouldn't. It would be a very low probability of knocking off a sufficient foam.
No. What I meant to say, Jim, is let's say the crew would have identified that, hey, my gosh, we have a hole in the wing, but they're in orbit already.
Right.
What do you do?
Okay.
Because they know they can't re-enter without losing the machine.
I mean, the only option would be if we had another shuttle to go up. I mean, you have to, someone.
How quickly could you prep another shuttle?
Well, it depends upon the time frame. In some years, we could probably do it within 3 months.
So they'd have to actually. Would they be able to? So they would have to get to like the International Space Station if they could. Now, are the shuttles able to do that in a normal orbit, or are they, or would they have?
Yeah. I mean,
so they would have been able to.
Okay, if they have enough propulsion left, what happened is then they could dock to the space shuttle. Let's say the space shuttle. I mean the
space station.
Space station was in orbit at the time, and they would go ahead and dock with the shuttle if they had enough, let's say, fuel in the rockets that direct them to the shuttle. You know what I'm saying? They don't need a lot. They have to be in the right orbit relative to that. So we'd have to look at, there's a lot of ifs here in this case on whether it could be done. In other words, you're asking me a very complex.
Right, yeah, no, I know.
This is a complex
I'm throwing you under the bus.
I can't just arbitrarily, even me, and I'm more of an aircraft person. I am a space person, but I have a good feel for what some things they could do, but depending upon the unique situation in terms of their fuel left, where they were in the orbit relative to where the space station is, there's a lot of ifs there that you'd have to go through orbital mechanics to figure out whether it's even feasible.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You would have a team of engineers.
I'm trying to figure that out.
That would
be like Apollo 13 all over again. Yeah.
It's not an easy question.
So yeah, because the complexity of space. So I mean, it isn't like every launch.
The mission control people. That's why they have probably hundreds in mission control, maybe 100 people there in different disciplines watching data. You know, in terms of looking at the different systems to see their condition, and if they have a problem, then they address. Okay, what do we need to essentially, make a change here because of what we see in terms of a potential problem.
You're right.
I mean, there's been a number of mishaps on the shuttle and also space station that the space agency had to work through, and in most cases, 90% of the time or so, were able to solve with the ground crew with telemetry, where they could talk to them to help them address those issues.
Right. So in some sense of the word, that would have been, if the crew would have known about that, that would have been a huge challenge. It wouldn't have been as easy as like, okay, that would have been a major undertaking.
Of the program, Now later, the longer we had more experience, and then looked at terms of maybe backup capabilities, but we were probably not there at that time. No, we were not there at that time.
For the Columbia, because that was early 2000s, wasn't it? Yeah. Interesting. Well, I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
That's a very challenging issue there, and not an easy one to solve without a whole group of specialists in their different disciplines to address that issue.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jim.
Okay.